The family sold her as Barren, but the widowed rancher said, "I don't need children, I need you." Dust Creek, Wyoming Territory, April 13th, early evening. Spring's breath had reached the prairie, carrying hints of thawed ground and the promise of new beginnings. At the town square of Dust Creek, lanterns swung from poles, wagon wheels creaked in the mud, and the air was heavy with the mingled scent of roasted meat and fresh hay. Farmers, traders, craftsmen, and townsfolk bustled between stalls of leatherwork, cattle brands, and wildflower bouquets, yet beneath the laughter lay a sharper sound, the chinking of coins, the low murmurs of bargain, and the holler of going once, going twice. Eliza May stood at the edge of the square, boots muddy and breath visible in the cold dusk air. She was 23, slender, with hair of chestnut waves tucked beneath a faded bonnet. Her eyes were wide, hesitant. A patch of old guilt, or perhaps failure, settled in her brow. She'd been brought here by her father, Tom May, a once prosperous horse trader, now choked by debt. Behind her, her father cleared his throat, threw back his shoulders, and presented her like one might present a horse or a steer. He announced loud enough for all to hear, "Ladies and gentlemen, here we have a woman skilled in housekeeping, cooking, and needlework. She cannot bear children. But if you need someone who'll stand by your hearth, take a look." The words landed like a slap in Eliza's chest. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Men in dusty hats nudged one another. Women pulled children behind skirts. Cattle lowed. Her father continued, "Half the price of a steer, folks. No grand promises, but someone who knows how to keep the ranch running. Anyone willing to take her tonight?" Eliza swallowed. Her cheeks burned from shame, the spring wind doing nothing to cool the sting. She had exhausted every remedy, every prayer, every bitter draught offered by midwives. And because she could not give her husband a child, she'd been returned home on the very day the younger woman arrived at his door. Now she stood here, a commodity, a bargain. Tom May raised his hand, gesturing toward a rough plank table where he laid down a small leather pouch of coins. The watching crowd quieted. Then Garrett Cole stepped forward from the edge of the throng. He was broad-shouldered, strong-jawed, 35, with lines of grief etched in his weather-bronzed face. He was known in the county as a widower, wife and only son lost to fever several years ago, and someone who kept his distance from idle gossip. He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn canvas sack of coins, set it on the table. The crowd stirred. Garrett cleared his throat, and leaning slightly closer to Eliza, said in a low voice, "I don't need children. I need someone who knows how to stay." The coins clinked on the board. A hushed silence spread. Tom May's eyes flicked between Garrett and the bag, then he nodded curtly. Eliza's heart pounded, uncertain if this act meant freedom or another kind of captivity. She looked at Garrett, his eyes steady, kind but guarded. He offered her no ring, no loud promise, no showy gesture, just a quiet nod. The crowd exhaled. Some shifted uncomfortably, others stepped away. Eliza remained frozen, boots anchored in the mud, bonnet trembling slightly on her head. Garrett turned away without looking back. He said quietly to Eliza, "If you're willing to stay," and walked toward his horse. Eliza stared at his back, the words echoing in her mind. Stay. And she wondered, stay and be valued, or stay and be owned? She glanced at her father, his pale face, his regret. The crowd dissipated. The lanterns swung with the wind. The spring music faded into the holler of carts leaving. Eliza took one step, then another. Garrett's saddle creaked. The horses stamped in the mud. She climbed into the cart beside him, her heart heavy, mind silent. As the town lights faded behind them, Eliza looked at Garrett's profile. Not a savior, not a captor, just a man who offered a place to stay. And for the first time in her life, she dared hope that staying might mean belonging. Cole Ranch, outskirts of Dust Creek, early May. The wind across Cole Ranch did not carry laughter. It swept dry and steady across open fields, rustling through grass still waking from winter. The house itself stood tall but tired, weathered timber, dark windows, and silence that echoed louder than any grief spoken aloud. Eliza sat stiffly in the wagon beside Garrett as they pulled through the gate. She had not spoken since Dust Creek, and he had not asked her to. The horses neighed softly, their hooves thudding against the dry ground. When they reached the house, Garrett dismounted first, offered her a hand. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm, not demanding. As she stepped down, her eyes swept the porch. A rocking chair swayed gently in the breeze. From behind the door, it creaked open. An older woman stood there, gray-haired, with a shawl wrapped tight across her shoulders and suspicion in her eyes. She said nothing, only looked Eliza up and down. Garrett spoke first. "Mother, this is Eliza. She'll be living here." The old woman's eyes narrowed. "Living? What for?" Garrett didn't flinch. "To help, that's all." She sniffed and turned away without another word. Inside, the house was clean but joyless. No portraits on the walls, no children's toys, just order and absence. Garrett showed Eliza to a room at the end of the hall. "This was used for guests," he said. "Sheets are clean. You'll find what you need." He lingered a moment at the doorway. Then, as if remembering something, stepped out and returned with a folded wool coat, soft, stitched with fading floral thread. "My wife wore this in winter," he said, placing it gently on the bed. "Thought you might need it." Eliza ran her fingers across the seams. She nodded. "Thank you." Garrett paused at the door again. "You're not here to replace anyone. And I won't ask you to." That night, Eliza sat on the edge of the bed in silence. She didn't cry. She didn't unpack. She only listened. To the wind against the windows, to the floorboards creaking, to her own pulse. No one came to check on her. But she did notice, tucked under the edge of the bed, a hot brick wrapped in cloth, still warm. Someone had thought of that. The days passed without ceremony. Eliza worked with her head down. She swept, mended clothes, helped with chickens. She didn't laugh. No one did in that house, but neither did anyone stop her from trying to make something useful of herself. At breakfast, Garrett barely spoke. His mother watched her like a fox watches fences. One morning, the older woman finally spoke. "You don't smile much, do you?" Eliza looked up from the stove. "I was not brought here to smile." "No," the woman muttered. "You were brought here because no one else would have you, not after you failed at being a wife." Eliza's hands stilled over the frying pan, but she didn't reply. What could she say that hadn't already been said to her face? She finished cooking, set the food down, and left the room. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Eliza wandered out to the back fence. A small swing still hung from the tree, weather-worn rope, an old plank seat. She sat there, hands gripping the wood, eyes distant. Garrett came to her side some minutes later, holding a small pail of feed. "Chickens need you tomorrow," he said. "I've got to ride out." She nodded. He hesitated. "Mother, she means well, in her way, but her mind's set on bloodlines." "She thinks I'm just a placeholder," Eliza murmured. Garrett didn't deny it, but he said, softly, "I don't." Then he walked away. That night, Eliza sat at the window in her room, the wool coat over her shoulders, the hot brick warming her feet again. Outside, the ranch was dark, except for the light of the barn lantern swinging gently in the wind. The house remained silent. But silence, Eliza was starting to learn, was not always emptiness. Sometimes it simply waited for something to be said, or to be shared, when the heart was ready. And she was almost ready. By midsummer, the fields dried to gold, and the air thickened with the scent of hay. Days stretched long and slow. That was when Eliza began gathering the children. They weren't hers. Most had no one. Or worse, people who'd stopped caring. She taught them in the loft behind the barn, where dust caught sunlight and old saddles lined the walls. There were no desks, just crates and burlap cushions. But the children came, every morning like clockwork. Garrett never said a word about it. But one day, Eliza noticed the wagon tracks looping wider, reaching the edge of the Miller farm, where two barefoot brothers lived alone. They came the next day, cheeks smudged, eyes wide. No one asked who sent them. She taught them letters. Let them trace words in ash. Read aloud stories of wild horses and faraway lands. Her voice, once so unsure, grew stronger with each lesson. The laughter of children returned to the air, not loud, not constant, but enough to remind the wind that someone was still here. One afternoon, while baking for the children, Eliza forgot to watch the hearth. Smoke billowed from the oven, and when she opened the door, flames licked the edge of the pan. She rushed to douse it, heart pounding. The biscuits were black, uneaten. That evening, she set the burnt tray outside. Garrett passed by on his way from the stables. He stopped, looked at the charred dough, then at her. She braced herself for reproach. Instead, he said softly, "Any biscuit left standing still better than a person who got burned trying." He walked on. But Eliza stood there, smoke curling around her, oddly comforted. That night, his mother found her scrubbing the old stone sink in the kitchen, sleeves wet, hair loose from the heat. The old woman leaned on her cane, voice sharp. "This house used to have a child's voice in every room. Now it's full of silence and strangers." Eliza didn't answer. She finished scrubbing, dried her hands, and walked out. She climbed the slope behind the house, where the ground was dry, the wind brisk. She stood there until the moon rose, her heart aching. Not from the words, but from the truth they nearly carried. Maybe she didn't belong here. Maybe she never would. But then came Garrett's footsteps, steady on the dirt. He didn't call her name, just stood beside her, the sky vast above. After a moment, he reached into his coat and handed her something small, an old comb, ivory-handled, edges worn smooth. "My wife used this," he said. "Used to sit right where you're standing, brushing her hair before bed." Eliza took it, fingers curling gently around the smooth teeth. "I ain't ever asked you to be her," Garrett added. "Ain't no one here askin' that. Just be Eliza." She nodded once, the comb pressed against her chest. The wind rose, lifting the edge of her shawl. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like running. By early November, the wind changed. It came down from the northern ridge, sharp and bitter, carrying with it more than just the bite of coming frost. It carried whispers, drifting between door frames, riding over fences, slipping beneath porch rails like smoke. Garrett Cole took in "A woman can't give him an heir," they muttered in the store, behind sacks of flour and crates of apples. "Wife of another once, wasn't she? Got returned like a spoiled horse. She ain't right. Too quiet. Walks like she's hidin' a secret. She's fillin' that schoolhouse with other people's children, 'cause she can't make her own." At first, Eliza tried not to hear. She kept her head down, hands busy, chopping wood, feeding chickens, tracing words with the children's small fingers. But then, one by one, the little feet stopped arriving, Boots no longer clattered up the path at dawn. The bench out front stayed empty, and the old barn, once echoing with giggles and mispronounced vowels, grew silent again. The children weren't the ones who stopped coming. It was their parents, holding tight to pride and poison, unwilling to let their kids be shaped by a woman they deemed broken. Garrett noticed. He didn't ask. Just watched as Eliza stood longer each morning on the porch, basket in hand, waiting for no one. Then turning, stepping back inside like nothing had changed. But it had. One cold afternoon, on her way back from town with a sack of salt and a bolt of fabric, Eliza took the narrow trail near the mill. The shortcut was faster, but lonelier, and that day it was not empty. He was waiting near the bridge, bottle in hand, breath sharp with whiskey, a man from town, rough-bearded, coat stained. "Well, if it ain't the one they tossed out," he sneered. "Garrett pick you up like a stray mutt? You warm his bed, or just his barns?" Eliza froze. Her heart thudded, but she stood her ground. "Don't say a word," he warned, taking a step forward. "Just wanted a look at the one ain't woman enough to keep a man, twice now." Before he could step closer, hoofbeats rang out on the trail. Garrett, silent as shadow, swung down from his horse. He said nothing, didn't even glance at the drunk. Just moved to Eliza's side, checked her hands, her eyes, then turned and held the reins out. "Come on." She climbed up without a word. Garrett mounted behind her, his presence solid, the heat from his coat warming her spine as they rode. They didn't speak until the house came into view. Then, still holding the reins, Garrett said quietly, "People talk about what they don't understand. That's what fear does." Eliza didn't answer. "But you," he added, "you understand what I need, and that's more than any of 'em ever did." She turned her head slightly, enough to catch his eyes. It wasn't comfort he offered. It wasn't defense or apology. It was trust, and it was steady. That night, Eliza lit the lamp in the barn, though no children came. She sat on a bale of hay, traced her fingers over the names on the old attendance ledger. One by one, she closed the book. Not in defeat, but in quiet defiance. She would still teach, someday, someone, but tonight she would rest in the safety of silence, in the strength of being seen not for what she lacked, but for what she chose to give. The rains arrived without warning. One morning the air hung heavy, the wind low and damp. By noon, clouds rolled in like tired giants, dragging shadows over the fields. The earth soaked it up greedily, but the rain didn't leave. It stayed, and stayed, until every corner of the land dripped and softened. Eliza began spending her days in the old storage shed behind the barn. Once used for tools and forgotten barrels, it had long since gone quiet. She swept the floor, patched holes in the roof with tarp and nail, and measured the walls with her eyes. It could be a place for the children, she thought, a warm corner to learn when the weather turned cruel. While clearing a stack of warped crates, she found it. A wooden chest, stained dark with age, its brass latch rusted shut. The key had long since disappeared, but the hinges surrendered with a firm tug. Inside, the smell of cedar and thyme rose like a breath. And nestled among yellowed linens and brittle papers lay a single book, thick, leather-bound, with the name Cole etched across the cover in a hand long dead. It was the family ledger, the kind passed down through generations, holding not gold or secrets, but names written in ink and care. Births, deaths, marriages, joys, sorrows. Eliza flipped through it, page after page, tracing names she had never heard aloud. Garrett's ancestors, brothers, aunts, even stillborn infants marked with a cross. Near the back, she found Garrett's name. Next to it, his wife's, Martha Cole, married 1,800 and 79. One child, Thomas, born and died within the same winter. And beneath that, one final line, barely legible, awaiting a seed of life. But the words had been crossed out in ink. Once, then again, as if to erase even the idea. Eliza stared at the page, her breath slow. The rain ticked gently against the tin roof above. She reached for a pen, her fingers trembling. She could write it, just her name. A small mark, a sign that she belonged to this place. But she hesitated, hovered, then closed the book. Not yet. That evening, the rain worsened. Garrett came in late from the field, soaked through. By nightfall, fever had taken hold. He lay still in bed, sweat clinging to his hair, breath ragged. Eliza sat beside him, wringing cloths, changing the water. She did not speak, did not cry. She simply stayed. Before dawn, she placed the family book on the small table near his bed, opened to that last page, the blank one, and set the pen beside it. She did not write her name. She waited. When Garrett stirred the next morning, weak and blinking at the soft light, the first thing he saw was the book. He reached for it slowly, his hand rough against the smooth leather. He read. Then, with the faintest trace of a smile, he picked up the pen and wrote a single line. Eliza, not born of blood, but chosen still. That evening, the storm broke. The sky turned pink with retreating clouds. Eliza came to the table, drying her hands on her apron, and stopped when she saw it. Garrett was already seated. In front of her place was a ceramic dish, old, delicate, one of the few heirlooms from his mother's side. It had not been used in years. He poured tea into it without a word, gestured for her to sit. She did. They didn't speak of the ledger, or the fever, or the words he'd written. But the dish between them said enough. She was not a placeholder, not a pity, not a woman kept from the rain. She was chosen. And in this quiet house, that meant more than any vow. The morning began like any other, light slipping in slow over the hills, dew clinging to the porch railings. The only difference was the sound of hooves. A rider approached, wrapped in oilcloth, carrying a satchel marked with the town seal. The mail came twice a month, sometimes with nothing but notices. But this was different. Garrett opened the envelope by the barn, reading in silence. From the house, Eliza watched as his eyes scanned the page, then lingered. His jaw tightened. He folded the paper carefully, slid it into his coat pocket, and went back to work without a word. Later, while folding laundry in the main room, Eliza found the paper resting on the table. Curiosity overcame her. She read it. Her heart skipped. Verification of land ownership required for property records update. Please confirm legal names of sole or joint proprietors. If married, indicate name of legal spouse. The line sat on the page like a stone. Garrett had never asked her to marry him. He had never spoken of vows, or papers, or rings. And Eliza had never questioned it, not out loud. Their days had found a rhythm, a quiet comfort. But the page made her wonder, where did she stand in the eyes of the world? That night, Garrett sat across from her at the dinner table. The paper lay between them. I do not need anyone's name on that land to know it's ours, he said softly. But if you want yours there, just write it. No courthouse needed, no preacher. Eliza stared at the blank line. The official seal, the space where her name could go, not as a tenant, not as a guest, but as something more. Her hand hovered above the page, pen trembling. Then, instead of signing beneath spouse, she wrote in the line marked co-owner. Eliza, by offer, not by blood. She pushed the paper back across the table. Garrett said nothing. But the next morning, the document was gone from the table. That afternoon, while preparing soup, Eliza noticed something new on the kitchen wall. Between the old calendar and the window hung a small wooden frame. Inside it, a copy of the form. The same document, now neatly pressed and displayed. The handwriting hers, the ink slightly smudged where her hand had lingered. Not a marriage license, not a declaration. But there, for all who entered to see, was a quiet truth. Garrett passed behind her, setting down a basket of firewood. He caught her looking. "I figured most folks frame a wedding picture," he said, voice low. "We'll frame the thing that gave us choice instead." Eliza smiled, not wide, but true. No veil, no altar. But this, somehow, felt more binding. They had chosen each other, and some choices spoke louder than bells. The afternoon sun cast long golden beams across the yard when the sound of wheels on gravel broke the stillness. A black carriage, unfamiliar and too polished for Dust Creek roads, slowed to a stop just beyond the gate. The metal rails of the gate glinted, and for a moment the horse's hooves sounded loud in the hush of late afternoon. Eliza was on the porch, shelling peas into a tin bowl. She sat on the weathered step, bonnet in her lap, fingers careful with the shells. The bowl caught stray sunlight, scattering pale green and mellow gold across her knees. She looked up, blinked once, then twice, her heart caught in her throat. The carriage was too fine, the man stepping out too deliberate. The man who emerged wore a coat that had never known dust. The cloth was heavy, dark, and tailored just so. His boots were freshly shined, the edges of his hat brim trimmed with silk ribbon. But beneath the fine clothes, the lines on his face told of age, regret, and many sleepless nights. He paused at the foot of the stairs, his gaze fixed on her. "Eliza," he said, voice low with a mixture of nerves and something I might call hope. She set the tin bowl down, and the peas, unnoticed, rolled into the grass at her feet. She stood slowly. "I heard you were here," he continued, stepping closer so that the board planks creaked. "With a rancher, teaching letters to farm children." He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet pouch. He held it out to her, his fingers brushing the edge of the gift ever so lightly. "I brought this for old times. A token, a peace offering." Eliza did not take it. Her eyes fixed on the pouch, then met his. "You're too late," she said softly. He startled then, his smile faltering. "I came to say I was wrong, about you, about everything. My wife, she passed last spring, and the doctor says I'll never have children of my own." His eyes searched hers for something, pity, forgiveness, maybe the old spark. "But I've come to understand, blood is not what makes a home." He paused as if choosing his next words carefully. "Eliza, come back, be my wife, we can start again, everything is still waiting for you." Inside the door of the house stood Garrett. He was watching, his posture still, hand resting lightly on the screen door frame. He made no move to intervene, but his eyes were calm and steady. Eliza faced the stranger squarely. She felt the breeze shift, the porch swinging between summer's memory and autumn's chill. "You know," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest, "I used to wait for someone to say those exact words." The man leaned closer, hope bright in his eyes. "Then say yes," he said quietly. "But the man who said them," she continued after a slow breath, "he came too late." His face fell, the velvet pouch slipping from his fingers to the boards. Her words hung between them like dust in the light. Behind her, the screen door creaked. Garrett stepped out, dust still clinging to his sleeves, his boots heavy on the boards. He did not raise his voice. His presence itself was enough. He walked past Eliza, and she didn't turn to watch. He halted next to her, placed one hand gently on her shoulder. And then, to the man, Garrett said quietly, "She was never something returned, so you cannot ask to take her back." The silence that followed was full, not empty. It held years of regret and unspoken truths. The man nodded once, bowed his head, and turned away. He walked back to the carriage, mounted without looking back. The wheels creaked, the horses stirred. The dust billowed around the gate as the carriage rolled out toward the ridge. Eliza watched until it vanished over the hill, the black roof disappearing into twilight. Then she exhaled, long and low, and leaned her back against the doorframe. Not in sorrow, in peace. Winter fell early that year. Snow piled thick across the rooftops and draped the prairies in white, each flake quiet as a whispered promise. The little schoolhouse that Eliza had started, once out of necessity, now stood as a symbol, a place of hope in a world too often cold. Children ran up the path every morning, muffled in scarves and mittens, calling out, "Mama Eliza." And Garrett, quiet Garrett, built new shelves for the books, long benches for reading, and dozens of tiny chairs. Each bench had her name carved in the wood, each shelf labeled in her handwriting. The room glowed with warmth, even when the wind howled outside. Eliza herself allowed a lighter laugh these days. But the fatigue had begun. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrote chalk on slate, and her eyes watered when a child asked questions she could not answer. Someone asked, offhand, "You look worn, miss?" She only replied with a small smile, "Maybe my heart is carrying all their warmth now." One spring market day, under a pale sky scattered with wind-tossed clouds, Eliza collapsed in the street. The children saw, startled, and Garrett, who had been loading crates at the edge of town, watched the cart pass by, slowed, then raced toward them. He carried her back in his arms, fear in his eyes as tears slid down his jaw. The doctor had to be summoned from across fields and frozen roads. Inside the farmhouse, amid the ticking of the old clock and the moan of winter wind, the verdict came. She's expecting. About 11 weeks. Garrett stood unmoved, his face still. Eliza stared at the floor, and the tears came, quiet, almost silent. "I was told I could never," she whispered. The doctor nodded. "Then now you are allowed." The weeks that followed were precarious, but full of light. Garrett planted pear trees outside the porch, 3 young saplings which he called Hope Orchard. Eliza read books about motherhood, about birth and lullabies, though her voice was still soft and uncertain. On the classroom wall, children taped drawings, tiny hands holding big hearts, babies wrapped in quilts, flowers blooming under snow. It wasn't grand or perfect, it was sacred. And then came the night. The wind flared, the rain lashed the windows, the horizon cracked with thunder. Eliza clutched Garrett's hand. The doctor had been delayed. The barns shook under the storm's breath. In that overturned moment, Garrett guided her. His arms steadied, his voice quiet but firm. "You're not alone," he said. "I'm here." When the baby came, her cry cut through the storm like sunlight breaking ice. Strong and insistent, a girl, eyes brown like Eliza's hair in autumn light. Garrett held them both, voice husky. "She looks like you, brave enough to come where we were afraid to stay." In a trembling moment, he opened the family ledger, the same one he had written the line in. "Eliza, not born of blood, but chosen still." And this time he wrote beneath it, "Eliza, chosen to love, and now loved so much, she gives life." Clara, daughter of 2 souls who had nothing but faith. The orchard outside bloomed that spring, pear blossoms drifting on the breeze. The schoolhouse kept its name, Eliza's school, for hearts, not heirs. The little girl grew, Toddlers around her ran to class and called both Eliza and Garrett Mama and Papa, though they were never bound by birth or vow. On the gate of the school was carved one last line: "Not from blood, from love. And sometimes love brings life." And there, beneath it all, the old farm, the pear trees, the small voices and the laughter, stood the proof that even a heart told it was barren can bear the richest harvest. And so, at the quiet end of the valley, where storms once raged and silence once settled heavy, a house stood with windows lit and a garden blooming. Not every love story needs a wedding. Some just need a roof, a name whispered softly, and a hand that doesn't let go, even when the world tries to. If this story found a warm place in your heart, don't forget to hit that hype button and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales of grit, grace, and the kind of love that builds homes out of broken timbers. We'll see you at the next sunset. Keep riding true.